It started as an ordinary night shift at Green Valley Hospital, a small rural medical center just outside of Little Rock, Arkansas. I had picked up the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift because my usual job at a bigger hospital was short-staffed, and extra cash never hurt. The facility was old, built in the 1960s, and while it had been renovated piecemeal over the decades, it still had long, narrow hallways, peeling wallpaper, and those fluorescent lights that flicker just enough to make you think the bulbs are about to die. The first hour of my shift was normal, checking on patients, updating charts, making sure the monitors were functioning. It wasn't particularly busy. Most patients were asleep, the ones who weren't just dozed quietly in their beds, hooked up to various monitors. I walked past room 312 when I heard a faint tapping. At first, I thought it was the old building settling. Then it came again, a rhythmic, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I knocked lightly on the door. "Hello? Anyone there?" A small voice whispered from inside, "I can't sleep." I pushed the door open and saw Mrs. Caldwell, an elderly woman with advanced dementia, sitting upright in bed, staring blankly at the corner of the room. "It's okay, ma'am," I said softly. "Try to lie back down. I'll check on you again soon." Her eyes didn't leave the corner. "He's there," she whispered. I scanned the room. Nothing. The closet was shut, the window blinds drawn. "Who's there?" I asked. "He's watching," she said. "He's waiting. He has no face." I chalked it up to her condition and tried to reassure her. I adjusted her blankets, dimmed the lamp slightly, and left. But as I stepped into the hallway, I felt a cold draft brush against my neck. The hallway was still, the air thick, as if the building itself had drawn a breath and held it. I shook my head, telling myself it was just my imagination. Night shifts tend to play tricks on your mind when you're alone in a hospital full of sleeping patients. Around 1:30 a.m., I did my routine rounds. The hospital was eerily quiet, except for the hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional beep from monitors in the ICU. I passed room 314, which had been empty for weeks, since Mr. Jensen had passed away from a heart attack. The door was slightly ajar, and the lights inside flickered even though no one was supposed to be there. I paused, staring. A shadow seemed to move across the floor, shifting toward the bed. My stomach tightened. "Hello?" I said. No answer. I walked closer, heart pounding. The air was damp, like someone had spilled water on the floor recently. The closer I got, the more distinct it became. Wet footprints, small and neat, leading from the doorway to the edge of the bed. I froze. There shouldn't have been any footprints. The room had been empty, thoroughly cleaned. I stepped back to the hallway and looked around, but no one was there. I hurried to the nurse's station, hoping to find another staff member, but I was alone. My radio crackled faintly, even though it had been off. A voice whispered, almost too faint to hear, "Help me." I froze again. The hospital was completely empty except for me. The words were close, right by my ear, yet no one was visible. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously walked back to room 314. The footprints were gone. The room was empty. The air smelled of damp earth, stronger than before. My skin prickled. I felt eyes on me, but when I spun around, there was nothing but the dim glow of the hall lights and the faint hum of the monitors. By 2 a.m., I was rattled but tried to continue my rounds. That's when the intercom in the hallway flickered on by itself. A soft, wet breathing sound came through, followed by a whisper, "Get out!" I ran to the nearest patient room, checking behind doors, under beds, closets. No one. Each room was empty, each bed occupied by patients peacefully sleeping. Then I heard the footsteps, wet, squelching, slow, coming from the end of the hallway. Not in my direction, but toward the emergency exit. I gripped my flashlight tighter and my skin crawled. I followed the sound, stepping carefully, but the closer I got, the louder the steps became. Then they stopped abruptly. I reached the end of the hallway. The emergency exit door was locked. No footprints anywhere. But there was a single handprint on the glass, smudged, wet, large, adult-sized. I jumped back. My heart raced. I told myself someone had to be playing a prank, but the hospital had been empty except for the night staff. And it wasn't even the weekend. Visitors weren't allowed after 8 p.m. Around 3 a.m., I went to the staff lounge to get coffee. The machine was off, even though I'd left it on. I flicked the switch and it sputtered to life. But the drip tray was full of murky water, not coffee. A faint smell of mud and decaying leaves filled the room. I left the lounge quickly, glancing back. The lights flickered again, briefly plunging the hallway into darkness. In that split second, I could have sworn I saw a figure at the end of the hall, standing still, head tilted slightly. Then the lights returned, and nothing was there. By 4:15 a.m., the patients started waking up. Several residents from the dementia unit were shouting about a man in the room, someone standing by their beds, someone whispering to them. Nurses tried to calm them, but each one swore the figure was real. I checked the surveillance monitors. Every camera showed empty hallways. Nothing moved. No one entered or left. But sometimes, if you watched long enough, one camera would flicker, and for just a frame, a dark figure would appear at the far end of the corridor, motionless, face obscured, then disappear as if it had never been there. At 5:30 a.m., the head nurse called the day shift. I told her everything that happened, carefully leaving out my fear, just giving facts. She suggested I rest while the patients were being checked. I went to the on-call room, but sleep didn't come. Around 6 a.m., I finally went back to check room 312. Mrs. Caldwell was gone from her bed. The window was open, and muddy footprints led from her room down the hallway. Not just small, child-sized prints, but larger adult prints too, all heading toward the rear exit. I panicked and ran to the exit doors. They were locked. I checked the back parking lot through the glass. Empty. No footprints in the lot. Nothing. When the morning staff arrived, they found Mrs. Caldwell in her room again, dead, peacefully asleep. Her shoes were gone, and her feet were wet and muddy. She had no memory of leaving the bed. No one could explain it. Weeks later, I found out that the building had been built over an old cemetery. During renovations in the 1960s, records showed that several graves had been disturbed. Local rumors claimed that night staff occasionally reported strange sounds, cold drafts, and shadows moving through hallways. I never went back for another night shift after that. I stayed on the day crew, but I still get phone calls from colleagues reporting wet footprints, doors opening and closing by themselves, and patients claiming someone with a faceless head and black, wet shoes watches them at night. Sometimes, late at night, when I drive past Green Valley Hospital, I swear I can see a shadowy figure standing at a window on the second floor, watching the empty parking lot, waiting for the next night shift. Story the end. It started like any other night. I was working the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift at St. Vincent's Medical Center, a fairly quiet hospital in a small town in Pennsylvania. I had worked there for nearly 3 years, and the night shifts were always a strange mix of boredom and unease. The halls silent except for the occasional beep of monitors or the shuffle of a patient's walker. But that night, something was different. The air felt heavy, almost electric, and there was a faint smell like burnt hair that made the back of my throat itch. I was assigned to the telemetry unit, responsible for checking patient vitals and responding to alarms. Around midnight, I was walking past room 312 when I heard it. A soft humming, almost a lullaby, coming from inside. I knew that room well. Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman recovering from surgery, had been asleep for hours. I peeked in. The bed was empty. I called her name, my voice cracking slightly, and saw nothing. The window was closed, the door locked. I checked the nurse's log. She hadn't left the room. I double-checked the camera feed, and for a moment I thought I saw her sitting at the edge of the bed, staring at me with hollow eyes. Then she vanished. I reported it to my coworker, Dan, a veteran night shift nurse who had worked there for nearly 20 years. He chuckled and shook his head. "You're letting the night get to you," he said. "Take a coffee and calm down." I tried to, but the feeling wouldn't leave me. As I made my rounds, I noticed subtle things. The monitors flickered, briefly showing static instead of readings. Shadows seemed longer, stretching across the hallway like fingers, and the whispers started, barely audible, coming from nowhere, calling my name softly. By 2 a.m., I had entered the empty corridor outside the ICU. The lights overhead flickered, then went out, plunging the hallway into near darkness, save for the pale glow from the monitors in each room. That's when I heard the scraping, a low, deliberate sound like nails dragging along linoleum. My pulse spiked. I shined my flashlight down the hallway, but nothing moved. Then I saw it. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, standing at the far end, unmoving. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side, and its eyes, completely black, fixed on me. I froze, unable to look away, and in that instant, the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. No matter how far I walked toward the figure, it stayed the same distance away, always staring, always waiting. I ran back to the nurse's station, heart pounding. Dan looked up from his paperwork. "What's wrong?" he asked. I pointed down the hallway. "It's there. Someone's there." He glanced, then frowned. "No one's there. Hallucinations from too many night shifts. Sit down." I wanted to argue, but my voice caught in my throat. I could still feel it, the black eyes following me wherever I moved. The whispers came again, closer this time. "Don't leave. Stay." Hours passed in a blur. Every time I checked on patients, I felt someone watching from the shadows. Objects moved slightly when I wasn't looking. Chairs turned, monitors blinked erratically, and sometimes I could swear I saw figures crouched at the edges of my vision, vanishing the moment I turned my head. At 5 a.m., a patient in room 305 began screaming. I ran in, but the bed was empty. The monitors were gone, and the room seemed impossibly cold. I tried to call Dan, but he wasn't responding. Then I realized the shadows in the hallway had shifted. They were moving, crawling along the walls, converging toward me. The whispers grew louder, almost urgent now. "Join us. Stay with us." I ran, heart hammering through the twisting corridors. Every door I opened led to another identical hallway, another empty room. Time seemed meaningless. And then I saw her, Mrs. Thompson, standing in the middle of the hall, eyes black, humming that lullaby. She raised a hand, beckoning me. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. The next thing I remember, sunlight was filtering through the windows. I was outside the hospital, disheveled, shaking. Staff were arriving for the day shift. Everything looked normal, like the night had never happened. Mrs. Thompson was in her room, asleep. Dan was in the nurse's station, pretending nothing had occurred. I tried to explain what I had experienced, but no one believed me. The cameras showed nothing unusual, the logs confirmed no patient had wandered, and the night shift reports were blank. It was as if the entire hospital had swallowed the night whole, leaving no trace of what I had seen. I quit my position shortly after that. I couldn't bear the thought of returning, of stepping into those halls where time twisted and shadows moved with a life of their own. But even now, months later, I can't shake it. The whispers sometimes return in my dreams, the lullaby echoing through endless corridors. I have nightmares about the black-eyed figures, about the impossible hallways, about Mrs. Thompson reaching out for me, silently urging me to stay. And I know, deep down, that part of me never really left that hospital. That the night shift claimed me, just as it claimed everyone before and will claim anyone foolish enough to walk those empty halls after midnight. Every night, I double-check my locks, convinced I hear faint dragging outside my bedroom door or a soft humming from the dark corners of my house. I tell myself it's my imagination, but I know better. The night never forgets. The night never releases. And some corridors, once entered, stay with you forever. Story, the end. It was 10:45 p.m. when I pulled into the parking lot of the Westbrook Medical Center for my first solo night shift as a security officer. The hospital was an older building on the edge of town, mostly empty after visiting hours. The only lights outside came from the flickering street lamps and the faint blue glow of the emergency room entrance. It was the kind of place that looked fine during the day, but unsettlingly wrong after midnight. I'd done security work before, malls, warehouses, construction sites, but hospitals always felt different. Something about the smell of antiseptic mixed with the hum of machines and the occasional muffled cough from down a corridor made the air thick, heavy. My job was simple. Patrol the halls, make sure all side doors stayed locked, and check the cameras from the security office once an hour. There were only 2 people on the overnight staff besides me that night. Nurse Evelyn, who ran the small intensive care unit, and a janitor named Drew. The ICU had 4 patients, all elderly, and none expected to be awake. It was supposed to be an easy night. At least that's what I thought. At around midnight, I started my first patrol. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off the pale linoleum floors. Most of the rooms were dark except for the faint monitor lights blinking green and yellow. Everything looked normal. When I reached the end of the east wing, I paused by the stairwell door, which had a small rectangular window. The stairwell light was off, but I saw something move down there, just a flicker of shadow, like someone stepping around the corner. I keyed my radio. Drew, you down in the east stairwell? His voice crackled back. Nope, I'm on the second floor restroom. Why? Thought I saw someone down here. Could be your reflection. Those windows always trip people up, he said, chuckling. Maybe he was right. But when I looked again, I could have sworn I saw the shadow move again, this time distinctly shaped like a person. I opened the door slowly and called out, "Security! Anyone down there?" Silence. The air inside the stairwell was colder than the hallway, noticeably so. My breath puffed out in front of me. The steps echoed as I descended. About halfway down, I caught a faint smell, something sour and metallic like rust mixed with bleach. The smell got stronger near the basement door. The basement was restricted to maintenance only, but curiosity got the better of me. I keyed in the access code and pushed the door open. The hallway beyond was dark. A few dim lights flickered along the ceiling. The smell was worse down there, rotten chemical like old blood. I stepped forward cautiously, sweeping my flashlight across the walls. Everything was empty, no movement, no sound, just rows of storage doors. Then, somewhere behind me, something metal clanged loudly like a dropped tray. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. Nothing. I started backing toward the stairwell, telling myself I'd check the cameras once I got upstairs. But before I reached the door, I heard faint footsteps. Slow, dragging, uneven. The kind of sound someone would make if they were wearing shoes that didn't quite fit. I froze. "Hello?" I called out. The steps stopped. Then, from the far end of the hallway, a shape emerged. It was tall, thin, moving unsteadily, shoulders hunched forward. Its clothes looked like hospital scrubs, but soaked dark around the chest and sleeves. I raised my light and felt my stomach drop. The figure's skin was a bluish gray, and its eyes were open wide, glassy, like two dull marbles. Its mouth hung open, but no sound came out, only a faint clicking, like teeth tapping together. I stumbled backward. "Sir, you need to stop right there!" It didn't stop. It just kept coming, slow, dragging its left foot. Its bare foot made that awful sticky sound on the tile, leaving faint smears behind. I turned and bolted up the stairs. When I slammed the stairwell door behind me and looked back through the glass, the hall was empty again. I ran straight to the security office, breathing hard. I pulled up the basement camera feed, but every screen showed static. The other cameras were working fine, just the basement ones were dead. "Hey, Drew," I radioed, trying to sound calm. "You ever go down to the basement?" He snorted. "Hell no. That place creeps me out. Smells like a morgue." My stomach tightened. "Why's that?" "Used to be one," he said casually. "Old wing before they moved everything upstairs. They shut it down after a flood messed up the power back in the 90s. That made sense. The smell, the old doors, the water stains I'd seen. But still, what the hell did I just see down there? Around 1:30 a.m., Nurse Evelyn came into the security office looking pale. "Did you see anyone come through the East Hall?" she asked. I shook my head. "No. Why?" "One of the ICU patients, Mr. Hollis, keeps talking about someone standing in his doorway. I checked twice. Nobody was there." I thought about the figure in the basement. "What's his condition?" "Comatose," she said softly. "He hasn't spoken in 3 weeks." That made the hairs on my neck stand up. We checked his room together. Mr. Hollis was lying perfectly still, eyes closed, hooked up to his monitors. The machines beeped steadily. Everything seemed normal until I noticed the faint, wet footprints leading up to his bed. They started near the door and stopped right beside him. Evelyn saw them too. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Maybe Drew mopped here," I said quickly, though I knew it was a lie. "No," she whispered. "He hasn't been in this wing all night." We followed the footprints out into the hall, but they faded halfway down. The rest of the night, things just kept getting worse. Around 2:40, I heard Drew on the radio. His voice was shaky. "Hey, I think someone's in the storage room." I heard banging inside. "Stay put, I'm coming," I said. When I got there, Drew was standing by the door, mop in hand like a weapon. The banging had stopped. "You hear that?" he whispered. I nodded and opened the door. The room was pitch dark. I stepped inside, sweeping the beam of my flashlight across shelves of cleaning supplies. Nothing seemed out of place, until I caught sight of a trail of small dark droplets on the floor. I followed them to the corner where a large linen cart stood. The sheet covering it was damp, almost black near the bottom. I pulled it back. Inside the cart was a pile of old hospital gowns, all soaked through with what looked like dried blood. Beneath the cloth, something moved. I jumped back, heart racing. The sheet shifted again, slow, deliberate, as if someone or something was breathing underneath. "Call Evelyn," I said to Drew. "Now." He bolted. I inched closer, one hand on my flashlight, the other gripping my radio. The sheet lifted slightly, and I saw a hand. It was pale and was waterlogged, the skin wrinkled and blue. The fingernails were dark, cracked, and one finger was bent backward at a sharp angle. Then the hand shot upward, grabbing my wrist. I screamed and yanked away. The sheet flew off, revealing a body, emaciated, bloated in places, with hospital ID bands still on its wrist. The name was faded, unreadable. Its eyes were open, but it wasn't breathing. And yet it moved. It sat up, bones cracking, mouth opening in a silent gasp. The smell that hit me was unbearable, decay and chemicals. I ran out of the room and slammed the door. Evelyn and Drew came running. "What happened?" she asked. "There's a body in there," I said, panting. It's not supposed to be alive." Drew looked terrified. "That's the old storage room. They used to keep overflow from the morgue there before it closed." We turned to look down the hall and saw wet footprints leading away from the door. They trailed toward the ICU. We followed them cautiously. The lights flickered overhead, and every sound seemed amplified, the hum of the vents, the soft creak of the ceiling. When we reached Mr. Hollis's room again, Evelyn froze. The footprints stopped right at his bed, and this time his monitor was flatlining. She rushed to his side, checking for a pulse, but it was too late. He was gone. And standing in the reflection of the window behind her, I swear on my life, was that same gray figure I'd seen in the basement, staring at us. I pulled Evelyn back, but when I turned around, the window was empty. We called 911 immediately. When the paramedics arrived, they tried to revive Mr. Hollis, but he was long gone. I told the responding officer everything about the basement, the figure, the footprints, but he just looked at me like I was crazy. The next morning, when the coroner arrived, I saw him roll a covered gurney out of the hospital. The sheet covering the body slipped slightly at one corner, and I caught a glimpse of the tag on the toe. The name was barely legible under the plastic, but I made out one word clearly: Hollis. I stopped him. "Wait, he was alive last night." The coroner frowned. "No, sir. Mr. Hollis was declared deceased here 6 weeks ago. We're just moving him from the old cold storage. You must be mistaken." I stared at him, unable to breathe. "That's not possible. He was alive. I saw him." The coroner just shook his head and kept walking. I quit that night. I couldn't stay another minute in that building. But for months after, I kept having the same dream. I'd be walking through the hospital halls at night, my flashlight flickering, and I'd hear that slow, dragging footstep behind me. When I turned around, there'd be that pale figure in scrubs standing just at the edge of the light, head tilted, eyes wide and lifeless. The last time it happened, I woke up to find muddy footprints on the floor beside my bed. The smell of bleach and rot lingered in the air. I moved apartments the next day, but sometimes, especially on cold nights when everything's quiet, I can still hear that faint, wet drag across the floor outside my door. And every time I think about the hospital basement, about what was really down there, I still don't know what I saw, but I know it was real. Because some things in that building never stopped moving, even after they were supposed to be dead. Story the end. It started on a cold November night at the Ridgeview Hospital, a medium-sized facility on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. Marcus, a 32-year-old registered nurse, had just started his shift in the emergency department. Night shifts at Ridgeview were notorious for strange occurrences. Equipment going haywire, doors slamming, patients reporting things that weren't there. Most staff chalked it up to stress or fatigue, but Marcus had a different sense, a feeling in his gut that something was off. The first hour passed uneventfully. Marcus checked vital signs, administered medications, and dealt with the occasional intoxicated patient. By midnight, the ER had quieted down, save for a few regular patients. The fluorescent lights above flickered intermittently, a minor nuisance he'd learned to ignore. Around 12:30 a.m., Marcus heard it, a soft, deliberate knocking coming from the supply room down the hall. Odd, he thought, since no one should be there at this hour. He walked toward the noise, calling out, "Hello? Anyone in there?" No reply. The door was slightly ajar. When he nudged it open, The room was empty, boxes stacked neatly, supplies untouched. The knocking stopped. He shrugged it off as a maintenance worker or another nurse pulling a prank. But as he returned to his station, he noticed the temperature had dropped sharply. His breath fogged in front of him. The monitors on the beds flickered, and for a brief moment, static replaced the patient vitals. Marcus rubbed his eyes and stepped back. Everything was normal again, but the feeling of being watched lingered. By 1:45 a.m., things escalated. A patient in room 6 began screaming, though Marcus knew the patient was sedated and restrained. He ran in, but the bed was empty. Confused, he checked the surveillance feed on the wall outside the room. The camera showed an empty room, but in the corner, a dark figure crouched, its limbs twisted and long, eyes black voids. The figure vanished when Marcus blinked. His hands shook. He called the charge nurse, but the phone lines were dead. The intercom was static. Every electronic device he touched flickered and died. The hospital seemed to be swallowing him, the walls stretching, hallways twisting unnaturally. The fluorescent lights buzzed and dimmed, shadows stretching across the floor like long, creeping fingers. By 2:30 a.m., Marcus was frantic. He ran to the stairwell, hoping to escape to another floor, but it led him back to the ER, though the layout was subtly wrong. Doors in places they shouldn't exist, hallways bending at impossible angles. The knocking returned, this time louder, echoing in every corridor. Something was moving just beyond sight, fast, jerky, unnaturally. He stumbled into the chapel, an empty room usually peaceful. The air here was colder, heavier, oppressive. A figure appeared near the altar, tall, thin, limbs bending at impossible angles, head cocked unnaturally. Marcus froze. The figure's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then the whispers began, low, unintelligible, coming from every corner at once. Marcus! Marcus! He bolted, running blindly, corridors twisting, doors appearing and disappearing. Every attempt to leave led him back to the same hallway, the same oppressive darkness. The whispers grew louder, urgent, calling his name, following him, mocking him. He felt a cold hand brush his shoulder and spun around. Nothing. Yet the sensation lingered, icy and real. At 3:15 a.m., Marcus reached the administrative office. He slammed the door behind him, barricading it with chairs and desks. The monitors in the room flickered, showing distorted images, his own reflection staring back, twisted and elongated, limbs bending in impossible directions. The whispers intensified, now joined by tapping sounds like someone or something was rapping on metal, moving closer, circling him. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, Marcus couldn't tell. The hospital seemed suspended in a time loop, corridors stretching infinitely, lights flickering in rhythm with the pounding of his heart. Shadows moved on their own, pooling and stretching along the walls, forming shapes that were almost human, but wrong, unnatural. By 5 a.m., the first early morning staff arrived. They found Marcus huddled in the office, pale, trembling, whispering incomprehensible words about figures, whispers, impossible hallways. Security checked the hospital, but there was no sign of the figures he described. The cameras that should have recorded everything showed only static at key moments of the night. Marcus tried to return to the hospital later, but the memory of that night haunted him. He began to notice subtle signs outside the hospital. Shadows that moved wrong, whispers carried by the wind, and figures in the periphery of his vision. Friends noticed his paranoia, but he could no longer distinguish the normal from the abnormal. Weeks later, a nurse who had worked the same shift reported seeing a figure in the supply room, crouched and watching, before vanishing into thin air. Marcus knew what it was, the thing that had claimed the night, that had stretched the hospital into an unending labyrinth of terror. It wasn't bound by the hospital, not by time, not by space. No one believed him. No one understood that the night shift was not just work, it was survival. Marcus eventually left the job, but even at home, he couldn't escape the cold touches, the whispers calling his name, the tapping at the walls. Sometimes he would wake in the middle of the night, certain he saw long-limbed shadows moving through his apartment, waiting, watching, reminding him that the night shift had never ended for him. He realized, with a sinking certainty, that the thing had followed him, that it was patient, relentless, and eternal. Wherever he went, whatever he did, the whispers and shadows waited. The tapping never stopped. The figures never disappeared. And he knew that no matter how far he ran, the night would always be there, and with it, the terror that had claimed him years ago at Ridgeview Hospital. Marcus survived, but he wasn't free, and he knew, deep down, that the night shift would never truly release its grip on him. Story, the end. It was a quiet Tuesday night at the convenience store on the edge of town. I had been working the graveyard shift there for about 6 months, and the routine had become painfully predictable. Long hours, the hum of the fluorescent lights, the occasional customer who'd wander in at odd hours, half asleep and murmuring under their breath. I liked the solitude at first, the way the world outside seemed to disappear. But that night, everything changed. I arrived at 10 p.m., clocked in, and went through the usual motions. Checked the registers, stocked the shelves, made sure the freezers were running. The wind outside was howling, rain lashing against the windows. It was the kind of storm that makes the roads slick and the world outside seem distant, almost unreal. The store itself was warm, well lit, and quiet, and I found comfort in the mundane rhythm of my tasks. By around 11:30, the first oddity occurred. The front door chimed, but when I looked up, there was no one there. I frowned, thinking maybe it was the wind or a stray piece of trash hitting the door. I shrugged it off and continued scanning the items on the shelf for inventory. Moments later, the door chimed again, louder this time. I checked the security cameras. Empty parking lot. My stomach tightened, but I told myself I was just on edge because of the storm. As the hours passed, the unease grew. I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Products on the shelves seemed slightly out of place, like someone had moved them, but the cameras showed no one entering. The lights flickered intermittently, brief but noticeable, and each flicker seemed to cast shadows where none should exist. I found myself glancing toward the corners of the store more often, imagining movement that wasn't there. Around 1 a.m., I went to restock the drink cooler when I heard a low sound, like someone dragging their feet behind me. I froze, listening. The store was empty, save for me, and the sound stopped. Heart pounding, I told myself it was just the storm outside, the way the wind and rain made the building creak. I continued my work, but a growing sense of being watched gnawed at me. At about 2:15 a.m., things escalated. The cash register I had just finished counting began ringing on its own. The drawer popped open, then slammed shut, rattling the coins inside. I jumped back, fumbling with the buttons to close it properly, but my hands shook so badly I could barely function. I looked around, half expecting to see someone hiding, but the store was empty. That's when I noticed the reflection in the glass door, something standing behind the counter. I spun around, but no one was there. My pulse raced. I checked the cameras again, watching the feed carefully. On one camera, I saw a figure, dark and tall, standing just outside the store, face obscured by the shadows of the storm. Then, in an instant, it vanished. My stomach dropped. I had never felt fear like this, not from a storm, not from the loneliness of the night, not from anything. Something was out there. Something was waiting. By 3 a.m., I was on edge, unable to focus. The door chimes rang sporadically, even though the cameras continued to show an empty lot. I could hear faint whispers, unintelligible, coming from the corners of the store. I told myself it was the wind, but the voice was too deliberate, too purposeful. It seemed to move with me, following me from aisle to aisle. I could feel eyes on my back, even though I could see nothing. I decided to lock the doors, hoping it would contain whatever was there, or at least give me a sense of control. But as soon as I flipped the locks, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath came out in misty clouds, and the lights flickered violently. Then I heard it, a low, guttural laugh echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. I spun around, trying to locate the source, but there was nothing. The air was heavy, almost pressing down on me, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. I tried calling the store manager, my voice shaking, but the line was dead. I ran to the back room, hoping to find the emergency phone, but as I entered, the door slammed shut behind me with a force that nearly knocked me over. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder, now overlapping, almost coherent. "You shouldn't be here. Leave. Leave now." I could feel the presence moving closer, circling, patient and deliberate. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed. Time lost meaning. Every shadow seemed to grow longer, every flicker of light revealing shapes that vanished the moment I focused on them. I was crouched behind the shelves, unable to move, trembling uncontrollably. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, pacing the store. They stopped near the counter. I dared not look. The whispers were now a chorus, echoing inside my head. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be here. At 4:30 a.m., I mustered enough courage to look toward the front. The glass door was wet with rain, but through it I could see the figure again, tall, dark, faceless, standing in the parking lot. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I fumbled with the locks, finally forcing the door open, and ran into the storm outside without a second thought. I didn't stop until I reached my car, soaked, trembling, and gasping for air. When I looked back at the store, it appeared normal from the outside, lights flickering like any other stormy night. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what had been waiting for me. I never returned to that store. My manager eventually replaced me on the schedule, citing personal reasons, and I didn't argue. Years later, I learned that other night shift workers at convenience stores in the area had reported similar experiences. Odd figures outside the windows, voices whispering from empty aisles, equipment malfunctioning inexplicably. Some quit, some stayed, convincing themselves it was stress or imagination. I know better. Whatever it was that night, it wasn't imagination. It was patient, watching, waiting for anyone alone in the quiet hours. Even now, when I drive past a convenience store late at night, I feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I glance at the windows, half expecting to see a faceless figure staring back at me. I know I will never forget that night, the way the air pressed against me, the whispers that invaded my mind, and the sense of being hunted in a place that should have been safe. Some nights, I still hear faint whispers in my apartment, almost indistinguishable from the wind through the cracks of my windows. You shouldn't be here. I freeze, every muscle tensing, knowing the presence is patient. It doesn't forget. It doesn't forgive. It waits for the next night shift worker, the next person alone in the quiet hours to remind them of its existence. I never worked another night shift. I never went back to that convenience store. But I know that somewhere out there it waits, watching, patient. And anyone who works nights knows deep down that in the dark, in the silence, in the empty corners of the world, we are never truly alone. Story the end. It was the middle of winter in a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio, when I started working as a security guard at a hospital that had closed down a few years earlier. They were renovating parts of it into office space, and until that happened, my job was to patrol the halls, make sure no one broke in, and report anything unusual. Easy money, they told me. But the thing about abandoned hospitals is they don't stay quiet no matter how long they've been empty. The first night was nothing special. I walked through silent corridors where the lights flickered and the hum of old wiring filled the air. Most rooms still had broken equipment covered with dusty sheets. There was a strange echo in that building, a hollow, drawn-out sound that made every step feel like someone else was following right behind me. On my second night, I met the only other night shift worker, a janitor named Ben. He was in his 50s, quiet but friendly, with the kind of face that looked permanently tired. "You're new," he said, pushing a mop bucket past me. "Stay away from the East Wing if you can. Lights don't work right in there." "The East Wing?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "They closed it off years before the rest of the hospital. Something about a gas leak. Just bad vibes in there. You'll see." I didn't think much of it until later that night, around 3 a.m., when I passed the long hallway that led to the East Wing. The double doors at the end were chained shut with a heavy padlock, but I swear I heard movement beyond them, like someone dragging something across the tile floor. I froze, listening. It was rhythmic, slow, like a shuffle. Pause. Shuffle. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" Silence. Then a faint whisper, too soft to make out. I tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The chains rattled slightly, even though I hadn't touched them again. I stood there for maybe a minute before deciding I didn't get paid enough to deal with whatever that was. When I told Ben about it the next morning, he just sighed. "You heard it too, huh?" "You're not the first." "Heard what?" I asked. "Her," he said. "The woman from the East Wing used to be a nurse here back when the hospital was running. Something happened during a night shift. Nobody likes to talk about it. Best thing to do is ignore it. If you act like you don't notice, she'll leave you alone. I laughed it off, even though something about the way he said it made the hair on my arms stand up. By my fourth shift, I started to notice small things. Doors I had closed were open again. A gurney in one hallway moved a few feet from where I'd seen it an hour earlier. Once, I passed a room and caught sight of someone standing by the window. A woman, tall, in what looked like an old nurse's uniform. I turned to look again, and the room was empty. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Lights, playing tricks, reflections, the mind wandering in an empty place. But the air in that hospital started to change. I could feel it, cold in a way that didn't make sense. The kind of cold that doesn't touch your skin but sinks right into your bones. That night, during my 3 a.m. round, I walked down the main hallway when all the lights went out at once. The hum of electricity stopped. My flashlight was the only light left, the beam cutting through dust and darkness. I radioed Ben, but there was only static. Then I heard footsteps coming from the east wing. They were slow, deliberate, heels clicking softly against tile. I called out again, "Ben, that you?" No answer. The footsteps grew louder. I turned toward the chained doors, and that's when I realized they were open. The chains lay on the floor, padlock broken clean through like it had been cut. A cold draft swept down the hallway, carrying with it the smell of antiseptic and something else, something rotten. I knew I should have walked away. I should have called it in. But some part of me, some dumb, curious part, pushed me forward. The east wing was pitch black. I swept my flashlight across the hallway, and for a split second I saw her again. The nurse. She stood at the far end, facing away from me, her uniform stained dark down the back. Her hair was wet, hanging in long strands. "Hello," I whispered. She turned slowly. Her face was pale, the eyes completely black, and the skin around her mouth was cracked like she'd been screaming for years. She smiled, a wide, broken, awful smile, and started walking toward me. I stumbled backward, flashlight shaking in my hand. She didn't run. She didn't need to. Every step she took made the hallway stretch longer, the distance between us twisting like a nightmare that wouldn't let me wake. The lights above flickered once, and she was gone. I ran straight back to the security office, slammed the door, and sat there shaking until morning. When Ben came in, I told him everything. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. He just said, "You went into the east wing, didn't you?" I nodded. He sighed and took off his hat, rubbing his head. "That wing's cursed," he said quietly. It started back in the 80s. A nurse named Margaret was working overnight when the power went out during surgery. Backup generators failed. A patient, some kid, died on the table. The doctor blamed her. She locked herself in one of the rooms and... He paused. They found her a week later, hanging from an IV stand. I just stared at him. And they left her wing like that? Place was losing money. They sealed it off and pretended it never happened. After that, I tried to get transferred, but the company was short-staffed. I needed the paycheck, so I stayed. I stopped walking near the east wing. I kept my flashlight close, and I started wearing headphones to drown out the sounds of the empty halls. But some nights, I could still hear her. The shuffle of her shoes, the dragging sound, the whisper of her name echoing faintly through the vents. The last night I worked there, the power went out again. Total blackout. My flashlight wouldn't turn on, my radio was dead, and the emergency lights failed too. I could only see the faint glow of the moon through dirty windows. Then I heard the monitor beeping. It shouldn't have been possible. The hospital's power was off. But down the hall in one of the old patient rooms, I saw a soft green glow from a heart monitor. Beep, beep, beep. I approached slowly, my breath fogging in the cold air. The bed in the room was still made, sheets yellowed with age. The monitor kept beeping, even though nothing was attached to it. Then the sound stopped, and a voice said my name. Soft, female, right behind me. I turned, but no one was there. I backed out of the room, shaking, when I noticed wet footprints on the floor, bare feet, leading from the corner of the hallway straight toward the east wing. I didn't want to follow, but something about them, the way they glistened like fresh blood, held me. I reached the chained doors again. This time the chains weren't broken, but the padlock was swinging open as if someone had just unlocked it. I froze. And then the lights came back on. The hallway was empty. No footprints. No noise, just the hum of electricity returning. I grabbed my things and left without clocking out. The next morning, I went back to quit in person. Ben wasn't there. His mop bucket sat in the corner, the water still and dark. The supervisor told me Ben hadn't shown up for work that night. They found his car in the parking lot, door open, engine running, but no sign of him. The cops searched the building but found nothing. Nothing except a single, wet footprint near the east wing doors. I never went back. 2 months later, I got a call from another guard who had taken my old shift. He said weird things were happening, doors opening, lights flickering, whispers in the dark. He sounded scared. I told him, if you hear her walking, don't answer. Don't look at her. He asked, who? And then, over the phone, I heard it. The slow, dragging shuffle of wet shoes on tile. He screamed, and the line went dead. They never found him either. I moved across the country after that, took a job working daytime security at a mall. But every now and then, when I walk through the empty corridors before opening, I catch a glimpse of movement in the reflection of the glass storefronts. A woman in white, with wet hair and dark eyes, standing just behind me. When I turn, she's gone, but I still hear her. Shuffle. Pause. Shuffle. And then the whisper. You shouldn't have left me there. I haven't worked a night shift since. I don't think I ever will again. Story. The end. I remember the first time I worked the night shift at Cedar Brook Medical Center, a small hospital on the outskirts of Detroit. I had transferred from a bigger hospital downtown, thinking a quieter, suburban hospital would be easier, safer, less chaotic. I was wrong. So wrong. The night started normal enough. I was assigned to the general ward, tasked with monitoring patients, checking vitals, and handling any emergencies that cropped up. At around 11 p.m., a middle-aged man was admitted after collapsing at home. His vitals were unstable, and the paramedics reported he had been incoherent, muttering about shadows and voices in the walls. I chalked it up to delirium from low blood pressure and possible heat stroke. By 1 a.m., the ward was quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a constant low-grade vibration that made the silence almost unbearable. I had just finished charting when I noticed it. The corner of the hallway, just beyond the nurse's station, seemed wrong. Shadows pooled there in a way that didn't make sense. The light didn't reach it fully, but the air felt colder. I shook my head. Stress, exhaustion, I thought. But the feeling didn't go away. Around 2:30 a.m., things started happening. First, it was small. The faint tapping of nails against the wall, just enough to make me glance up from my charts. Then the lights flickered, a strobe effect that lasted for a few seconds. That alone would have been normal. Hospitals have faulty wiring all the time. But then I noticed the man admitted earlier, the one in the corner room, was sitting up in bed, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. "They're here," he whispered, barely audible. "I can't. They're in the walls." I tried to calm him, but as I approached, I could feel it. The temperature dropped sharply, like a wall of icy air pressing against my chest. The monitors in the room started spiking randomly, alarms blaring for no reason. I stumbled back, stunned, and then I saw it, or them. From the corner of the room, a figure emerged. Too tall, unnaturally thin, with long, spindly arms that seemed to stretch beyond human limits. Its head was tilted at a wrong angle, as if its neck had no hinge, and its face... Well, it had no face. Just a dark, empty void where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. I froze. The man screamed, suddenly fully conscious and panicked. "Get them out! Get them out!" he yelled, clawing at the sheets. I called security, but the line was dead. I ran into the hallway, hoping to find someone, anyone, awake. The hallway was empty, eerily silent, except for the faint sound of dragging footsteps echoing from the far end, slow, deliberate. I reached the nurse's station and found the phone lines dead, the computers frozen. The fluorescent lights flickered again, and in that strobe, I saw movement, figures, dozens of them, standing in the halls. Their shapes were indistinct, but their presence was undeniable. They glided, never touched the floor, moving as if weightless, silently toward the rooms with patients. I didn't know what to do. I grabbed a fire extinguisher, trying to rationalize some kind of defense, but it felt pointless. The walls themselves seemed alive, pulsating with darkness. The figures moved closer, and I realized I could hear whispers, low, sibilant voices coming from every direction. Not words I could understand, just a steady stream of malice. I ran into one patient's room and slammed the door, locking it. The child inside, a 5-year-old girl, was awake, eyes wide. "They're in the walls," she said calmly, clutching her blanket. I wanted to reassure her, to tell her she was imagining it, but the cold pressed in and I realized she wasn't. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell. Time seemed to warp. The lights flickered constantly. Monitors went haywire, and every so often, I glimpsed the tall, faceless figures through the cracks under the doors. I could hear them moving in the walls, shifting through ventilation shafts, sliding under doors, and when they touched the patients, even lightly, the monitors would flatline, alarms shrieking. By the time morning came, the hospital seemed normal again. The figures vanished, the air warmed, and the child was asleep in her bed, perfectly fine. But the records were strange. The man who had been muttering about shadows had disappeared. Security cameras showed him walking into a room, then nothing, like he had never existed. The official explanation, patient elopement, but no one could find him. Other night shift staff whispered about similar events, missing patients, strange shadows, whispers in empty halls. Some claimed to have seen people vanish in front of their eyes. Others talked about the sensation of being watched relentlessly. The day staff always laughed it off, called it stress or exhaustion, but those of us who worked the graveyard shift knew better. I quit after 3 months. I couldn't handle it anymore. The cold, the whispers, the faceless figures that waited in the dark corners of every ward. But the memories never left. Sometimes I see a shadow move in the corner of my apartment, hear a whisper in the dead of night, and I'm transported back to those endless hours in Cedarbrook, watching figures glide silently just out of reach, waiting for the next patient to be alone and afraid. People say hospitals are places of healing. That's true during the day. At night, they're a liminal space, a place where things that don't belong in our reality can manifest. I've never spoken about this to anyone outside the night shift staff. No one believes it, but the ones who do are either too scared to speak or are no longer here. I warn anyone who considers working nights in a hospital. The shift doesn't end when the clock strikes morning. The shadows linger, the whispers continue. The figures watch, always, from the corners, from inside walls, from the ceiling tiles. And sometimes, if you're unlucky, they come for you. Years later, I still avoid hospitals after dark. Every time I drive past one, I feel the chill that never leaves, that oppressive weight of something watching, waiting. And I know deep down that those who are alone in the hospital at night, the real night when no one else is there, they're not alone at all. I can't explain it, I can't rationalize it, and no one will ever believe me. But I know the truth. The night shift is a doorway to something that preys on the living, and once it notices you, it doesn't forget. Even now, when the wind whistles outside and the world is silent, I hear faint whispers. I feel cold drafts in places that shouldn't be cold. And I know that whatever waits in the shadows, whatever haunts the hospital halls is still out there, watching, waiting, patiently. Some nights I dream I'm back in Cedarbrook. The halls stretch impossibly long. Monitors beep in irregular, chaotic patterns. The faceless figures glide silently, always at the edge of vision. And every time I wake up, my heart is pounding, and I know the reality of the night shift will haunt me forever. Story the end. It was the winter of 2018 when I started my job at a small hospital in northern Ohio. I had just finished my nursing degree, and while I didn't have much choice in where to start, the offer from Pine Grove Medical Center seemed decent enough. The pay was average, the benefits were okay, and they needed someone for the night shift. I told myself it would be temporary, just until I could find a better position closer to the city. I had no idea that those nights would change me forever. Pine Grove wasn't large, just a 3-story building with a small ER, a few dozen patient rooms, and an old psychiatric ward that had been closed off years ago. The hospital sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by empty lots and woods that went on for miles. From the outside, it looked like any other rural medical facility. But inside, once the sun went down, it felt different, too quiet, too still, as if the air itself was holding its breath. The night staff was minimal. There was me, a security guard named Carl, 2 other nurses, Shannon and Rachel, and Dr. Peterson, the overnight attending physician. Most nights were slow, with maybe 2 or 3 patients admitted, mostly elderly folks or the occasional car accident victim. The pay wasn't great, but I figured I could handle a few months of boredom. I was wrong. My first week went smoothly, though I couldn't shake the feeling that the building never really slept. There were noises that didn't make sense. The occasional distant footsteps when no one was walking, faint whispering near the old psych ward hallway, and doors that creaked open just as you passed them. I tried to brush it off as old pipes or my imagination. But then, one night around 3 a.m., I saw something that froze me. I was doing rounds on the second floor when I glanced down the hallway toward the old psych wing. The lights there had long been shut off, and a heavy steel door kept it closed to prevent unauthorized entry. But that night, the door was slightly open, just an inch or two, but enough for me to see that faint light was coming from inside. That was impossible. The psych wing didn't have power anymore. I hesitated, then went to find Carl. When we returned together, the door was fully closed again, and the lights behind it were off. Carl checked the lock. It was still secured. He looked uneasy, but tried to laugh it off. "These old places do weird things at night," he said. "Probably just the backup generator flicking on." I nodded, pretending to believe him, but my stomach churned the rest of the shift. That night, when I got home, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dim yellow light flickering behind the psych ward door. A few nights later, Rachel mentioned something strange. She said she'd heard crying coming from one of the empty patient rooms on the first floor. When she checked, the room was empty, but the sheets on the bed were disturbed, like someone had been lying there. Shannon rolled her eyes, saying Rachel was overtired, but I saw how pale she looked. We all laughed nervously and changed the subject, but from then on, none of us went anywhere alone if we could help it. The real nightmare began the following Friday. It was snowing hard, the kind of storm that isolates you from the rest of the world. The hospital was nearly empty. Only one patient, an elderly man with pneumonia, asleep in room 203. Dr. Peterson was in his office, and Carl was somewhere downstairs. Around 2:30 a.m., I was sitting at the nurse's station, trying to stay awake, when I heard a faint scratching sound. It was rhythmic, steady, coming from the hallway. I stood, flashlight in hand, and followed it. It led me to the psych ward door. The scratching was coming from the other side. "Carl?" I called, half hoping it was him playing a prank. No response. The scratching stopped. Then, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I froze. Every hair on my body stood up. Slowly, I backed away, refusing to take my eyes off that door. When I got back to the station, Shannon was there, looking just as pale as I felt. "You heard it too, didn't you?" she whispered. We didn't talk after that. We just sat there until dawn, jumping at every sound. The next night, I convinced myself it couldn't get worse. I was wrong again. At around 1 a.m., the monitors in the hallway started flickering. The security feed showed static, then brief flashes of what looked like people walking through the psych ward. Not staff. These figures moved strangely, heads tilted, limbs jerky like marionettes. I called Carl immediately, but when he got there, the footage was gone, replaced with normal empty hallways. He looked uneasy, but again he brushed it off. "Old system," he muttered. "Ghosts in the wires." Later that same shift, the patient in room 203 pressed his call button repeatedly. When I went in, he was trembling, eyes wide with terror. "There's someone in the corner," he whispered. "He's been watching me." I turned on all the lights. The room was empty. I tried to calm him down, gave him his medication, but when I turned to leave, I felt it too. A presence behind me, something cold brushing my neck. I spun around. Nothing. But the patient started screaming, pointing at the doorway behind me. I looked again. The lights flickered once, and for a split second, I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway, tall, pale, eyes sunken, wearing what looked like a torn hospital gown. Then the lights came back fully, and it was gone. The patient refused to sleep the rest of the night. I didn't blame him. By the third week, the entire night staff was on edge. Shannon quit after finding bloody handprints on the inside of one of the psych ward's windows. Rachel stopped showing up without notice. That left me, Carl, and Dr. Peterson. And then, one night, Carl disappeared. It was around 4 a.m. when I realized I hadn't seen him for hours. His radio was silent. I checked the cameras, nothing. I decided to look for him, starting downstairs. The main corridor lights were dim, and every sound echoed through the empty halls. As I passed the cafeteria, I saw something on the floor. A single shoe, Carl's. A trail of wet footprints led away from it, down the hall toward the psych ward. My hands shook as I followed them. The footprints stopped right in front of the psych ward door. It was wide open. There was light inside, dim, flickering like a candle. I called out for Carl, my voice trembling, but no answer came. I should have walked away, called the cops, something, but I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Rot, mildew, something old and metallic. The walls were peeling, paint curling off like dead skin. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. The light I'd seen came from room 308, deep in the corridor. When I reached it, the door was half closed. I pushed it open and nearly vomited. Carl was there, but he wasn't moving. He was standing upright, facing the corner, eyes wide open, mouth twisted in a silent scream. His radio was on the floor, static hissing. I whispered his name. He didn't move. Then slowly his head turned toward me, but his eyes weren't right. They were black, completely black, like two holes in his skull. I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight. The light rolled, briefly illuminating the far corner of the room. There was something else there, someone else. It looked like a woman, her hair long and matted, her face half hidden. Her mouth was open too wide, and when she spoke, her voice sounded like multiple people whispering at once. "You shouldn't be here," she said. I ran. I don't even remember how I got back upstairs, only that I locked myself in the supply closet and stayed there until morning. When I finally came out, Carl was gone. So was Dr. Peterson. No one answered the calls to their homes. When the day shift arrived, I tried to tell them what happened, but they looked at me like I was insane. Security checked the psych ward, empty. No sign of Carl. No sign of anything. The next night, I didn't show up. I quit, packed my things, and left town. I didn't even collect my last paycheck. But 2 weeks later, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, I heard static, and then a voice. Carl's voice. "You shouldn't have left," he said. "You belong here now." Then the line went dead. I changed my number, moved across the state, tried to forget. But sometimes when I can't sleep, I hear it again. The static, the whispering. And every now and then when I'm in bed and the room goes dark, I swear I can hear that same voice right behind me, cold and close. "You shouldn't be here." I've never taken another night shift job, but I still dream about Pine Grove, the flickering lights, the open door to the psych ward, and Carl's empty black eyes staring straight through me. Every dream ends the same way, with that voice whispering my name, telling me to come back. Story. The end. It was the summer of 2016 when I got hired at a 24-hour gas station off Route 41 in southern Indiana. I'd been between jobs for a few months, living out of my cousin's garage, so when the manager, a guy named Rob, offered me the overnight shift, I took it without thinking twice. The place was old, one of those independent gas stations that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 80s. Faded signage, buzzing lights, and the smell of motor oil clinging to everything. I worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. all alone most nights. My duties were simple: restock the coolers, clean up, and keep an eye on the register. It wasn't bad at first. Quiet, lonely, sure, but I actually liked the stillness. The highway was mostly dead after midnight, and you could go a good half hour without seeing a single car. The isolation didn't bother me, at least not at first. The first time I noticed something was off was around 2 a.m. one Thursday. I was standing behind the counter, half asleep, when I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure walking past the front windows, heading toward the pumps. I straightened up and looked outside, but no one was there. The security cameras didn't show anyone either. Just empty asphalt shimmering under the floodlights. I shrugged it off, probably fatigue or a bug crawling on the lens. But then, later that same night, I saw headlights pull up to pump 3, a beat-up old pickup truck. It sat there, engine running, but no one got out. After a minute, I stepped out to check, thinking maybe the driver had fallen asleep. When I got closer, I realized the truck was older than it looked. No plates, rusted body, the kind of vehicle that hadn't been on the road in decades. I tapped on the window. The driver wasn't moving. I thought he might be dead. But when I leaned closer, I realized something else. The cab was empty. The engine was running, but there was no one inside. I stumbled back, confused. Then, right as I reached for my phone, the truck's headlights flicked off. The engine sputtered once and died. I ran back inside, heart pounding, and locked the doors. When I looked at the security feed again, the truck was gone. I didn't tell Rob the next morning. I didn't want to sound crazy, but I couldn't shake it. Every night after that, I'd catch faint glimpses of movement outside, shadows sliding across the windows, reflections in the glass that didn't match my own. The worst part was the sound. Around 3 a.m., like clockwork, I'd hear faint humming, a tune soft and off-key like someone standing just outside the store, humming to themselves. I checked every time. Nothing. A week later, Rob asked me to cover an extra shift. I was already exhausted, but said yes. Extra pay was extra pay. That night, the air felt different the moment I clocked in. Heavier. Even the fluorescent lights inside the store flickered like they were struggling to stay alive. I made coffee, flipped through an old magazine, and tried to keep myself busy. Around midnight, I heard footsteps on the roof. At first, I thought maybe an animal had gotten up there, but the steps were too heavy, slow, deliberate, like someone pacing. I grabbed the flashlight and went outside, scanning the edges of the roof. No ladder, no way up. The sound stopped the moment I stepped out. When I went back inside, there was a fresh set of muddy footprints on the floor behind the counter. They led to the storage room and stopped right in front of the cooler. I stood there for a good minute, listening. The cooler door handle twitched. Just slightly, like someone was inside trying to open it from the other side. I turned and ran out of the store, not caring about the cameras, not caring about the money in the register. I sat in my car, doors locked, until the first hint of dawn appeared. When I told Rob what happened, he didn't even look surprised. "Don't worry about it," he said, lighting a cigarette. "This place does weird things at night. You get used to it." I didn't get used to it. Over the next few weeks, the incidents got worse. I started finding items misplaced, snack bags stacked in perfect pyramids, drinks lined up outside the coolers. One night, I came in to find all the lights off, even though the breaker was on. The security monitors glowed faintly in the dark, showing distorted, flickering images of the aisles. Every few seconds, I thought I saw someone standing there, tall, thin, wearing what looked like a mechanic's jumpsuit. But when I turned on the lights, the aisles were empty. Then came the smell. It started faintly like burnt rubber. Then it turned into something metallic, almost like blood. I searched everywhere, behind the counter, in the bathrooms outside by the pumps, but couldn't find the source. The smell lingered for days. Customers started complaining. Rob said it was probably a dead raccoon in the vents, but when the maintenance guy checked, he didn't find anything. One night around 4 a.m., I was restocking the soda fridge when I heard someone whisper my name. It wasn't over the intercom. It wasn't outside. It was right next to my ear. I spun around, heart hammering. The aisles were empty. Then the whisper came again, this time from behind the counter. I walked over slowly, gripping the flashlight tight. The security monitor showed a faint shadow standing near pump 3, the same pump from the night with the old truck. The figure wasn't moving. I zoomed in on the screen, and for a split second I saw a face. Burned, melted, one eye gone completely. The feed cut to static. The lights in the store went out. The humming started again. Closer this time. It was inside. I dropped the flashlight, fumbling for my phone, but it slipped out of my hand. When I reached down to grab it, I saw bare feet step into the beam of light. The skin was blackened, cracked like it had been burned long ago. I looked up slowly. The figure was inches from me. It wasn't breathing. It just stood there, staring with that one ruined eye. And then, in a voice that didn't sound human, it rasped, "Pump 3." Every light in the building flickered violently. The cash register started opening and slamming shut. The coffee machine hissed steam. I bolted for the exit, keys in hand, but the glass door wouldn't budge. Something cold grabbed my wrist from behind and yanked me back so hard I fell. The humming turned into full-blown screaming. Dozens of voices, shrieking all at once. I crawled toward the back door, slammed it open, and ran into the night. I drove straight home and called Rob the next morning to quit. I didn't even want my last paycheck. He didn't argue. He just sighed and said, "Yeah, I get it." A week later, I drove past the station on my way out of town. The building was burned down. Fire trucks were still there, spraying the last of the smoldering wreckage. I pulled over and asked one of the firemen what happened. He said it caught fire overnight, no one inside, but they found an old pickup truck near Pump 3, rusted out, engine cold. Said it hadn't been registered since 1989. The driver had burned alive inside, decades ago. Sometimes late at night when I stop for gas somewhere else, I catch a faint whiff of burnt metal, and every now and then I hear humming. Always the same tune. Always just behind me. Story the end. The first night I worked security at the old Riverside industrial plant in Indiana, I thought it would be easy money. The place had been mostly shut down for years, just a skeleton crew running the few machines still operating in the far corner of the property. My job was simple: monitor the cameras, make rounds every hour, and make sure no one broke in. The plant was massive, over 400,000 square feet of empty warehouse space, rusted metal, and echoing corridors. During the day, it looked like any other forgotten factory, quiet, hollow, dust clinging to every surface. But at night, it felt wrong, the kind of wrong that settles in your stomach like lead. I clocked in at 10 p.m., met the other guard, and he gave me a rundown. "Don't go into the West Wing," he said casually, like it was a joke. "The lights don't work and the cameras glitch out over there. Just stay near the active areas and you'll be fine." I laughed it off, thinking he was trying to mess with the new guy. But later, I realized he wasn't joking. By 1 a.m., the plant was silent except for the hum of the old generators. I was in the control room watching grainy black and white security feeds. Everything looked normal. Empty halls, flickering lights, the occasional rat scurrying by. Then I noticed something odd, a figure standing near the West Wing corridor. At first, I assumed it was a worker who'd forgotten to clock out, but when I zoomed the camera, the figure didn't move, just stood there, perfectly still. No hard hat, no reflective vest, no features, just a tall, dark outline. The feed flickered, static filled the screen, and when it came back, the figure was gone. I felt uneasy, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and set out on my first patrol. The hallways stretched endlessly, filled with the scent of rust, oil, and something else, something faintly sweet, almost rotten. My footsteps echoed off the concrete floor as I made my way down the long corridors. When I reached the West Wing, the air changed. It was colder there, unnaturally so. My breath came out in visible puffs, even though it was midsummer. The walls were lined with old machinery, covered in grime and cobwebs. My flashlight beam caught something carved into one of the metal panels. Symbols, circles, lines that looked hand-etched and rough, almost like claw marks. That's when I heard it, a slow, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed from deep in the darkness ahead. I called out, "Hello, security." My voice bounced back at me, distorted, delayed, like the building itself was whispering it back. The tapping stopped. I started backing away when my radio crackled to life. Static first, then a faint voice. "Don't look at it." That was all. Just 3 words. I froze. "Who is this?" I asked, but there was only silence. The channel went dead. I turned and walked quickly back toward the main area, my flashlight trembling in my hand. Every instinct told me I was being watched. I felt eyes on me, more than one pair. At one point, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow slipping across the far wall, silent but deliberate. When I got back to the control room, I checked the feeds again. The camera for the West Wing was black, static only. But on another feed, the one watching the storage area, I saw it again. A tall figure standing near the doorway, motionless. It was closer this time. I called the plant manager, but the call didn't go through. I tried again and again. No signal, no connection. I even checked my cell phone. Nothing. The whole system was dead. At 2:47 a.m., the power went out. Everything. The lights, the monitors, the air conditioning. The silence that followed was absolute. Then, after a few seconds, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, echoing through the corridor outside. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the sound. For a split second, I caught sight of something, a hand, pale and long, pulling back around the corner. I ran to the metal door and slammed it shut, locking it. My breathing was ragged, my heart pounding in my chest. Then the tapping started again, right on the other side of the door. Tap, tap, tap. Then a pause. Then the same 3 taps, closer, louder. I backed away, eyes fixed on the door. And then the sound of metal creaking filled the air, like something heavy leaning against it. The door began to bend inward. Just slightly, but enough for me to see the steel flexing under pressure. I shouted, "Who's there?" No answer. Just a whisper, low, guttural, impossible to make out. After a few moments, it stopped. The weight lifted. The tapping ceased. I didn't move for a long time. When the power flickered back on around 3:10, the cameras rebooted automatically. I rushed to check the feeds again and froze. Every camera showed static except one. On the West Wing feed, I saw the figure again. Closer now. Right in front of the camera. The lens focused just enough to make out the shape of its head, tilted unnaturally to one side, as if it were studying the camera. Its skin looked pale, almost translucent, and even though it had no visible eyes, I knew it was looking directly at me. I turned off the monitor. I couldn't stand it. The rest of the night passed in a haze of fear. I stayed locked in the control room until sunrise. When the morning crew arrived, I didn't tell them everything, just that the cameras had glitched, and I thought someone had broken in. The manager reviewed the footage, and when he came back, he looked pale. "There's nothing on the tapes," he said. "Just static. You probably imagined it." But I could tell he was lying. His hands were shaking. That night, I decided not to go back. I called in sick. 2 nights later, the other security guard, the one who had trained me, was found dead in the West Wing. They said it was an accident, that he fell from one of the catwalks. But when the police came to investigate, they found his flashlight still on, lying near one of the old machines. The last footage on the internal system showed him walking into the West Wing. Then the camera cut to static. No one works the night shift alone at Riverside anymore. In fact, most of the West Wing has been sealed off permanently. But sometimes when the night guard makes his rounds near that section, the motion sensors trip, the cameras flicker, and the same faint sound is picked up on the audio feed. Tap, tap, tap. No one knows what's really inside that part of the plant. Some say it's an old worker who died there decades ago, his spirit stuck in the place. Others say it's something older, something that feeds on fear. I don't know what I believe anymore, but I know what I saw. And I know that when the power goes out and the cold creeps in, the figure in the shadows starts to move closer, always closer. I've had nightmares about that night for years. Sometimes when I wake up, I can still hear the tapping, 3 slow knocks on the wall beside my bed, and every time I freeze, afraid to look, because I know that if I do, I might see that same pale face staring back. Story the end. It was the end of September when Daniel started his night shift at Hanover Shipping, a massive freight warehouse in the outskirts of Detroit. The facility was sprawling. Endless rows of stacked containers, towering shelves, and massive loading docks. Most day workers complained that the night shift was dull and lonely, but Daniel liked the solitude. That is, until the first night revealed a darkness he couldn't have imagined. Daniel arrived at 11 p.m., logging in at the front gate and making his rounds through the warehouse. The security guard handed him the keys, muttering about how the night shift always gets weird this time of year. Daniel laughed it off. He didn't believe in ghosts or urban legends. But by 12:15 a.m., he had begun to reconsider. It started with the forklifts. All of them were off, parked neatly along the side, yet he could hear the whirring of engines in the distance moving back and forth. At first, he thought it was his imagination, or maybe some old maintenance equipment starting on its own. But the sounds were precise, too precise to be accidental. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and walked toward the noise, shining it down empty aisles. The light caught nothing but rows of boxes and empty pallets. By 1 a.m., the temperature had dropped dramatically. Daniel's breath fogged in the air, even though the warehouse heating had been on. He started noticing subtle movements out of the corner of his eye, shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally along the walls. The distant whirring of forklifts was joined by something else, a tapping sound, like metal claws scratching concrete. Daniel tried to call the night manager via radio, but the device crackled with static. Every electronic device he touched flickered, lights dimming as if reacting to some unseen presence. The sense of being watched became overwhelming. He walked cautiously, every instinct screaming that he was not alone. At 2:05 a.m., Daniel entered the container area. This part of the warehouse was vast, dark, and maze-like. That's when he saw it. A figure crouched atop one of the stacked containers. At first, he thought it was a coworker, maybe playing a joke. But as his flashlight beam hit the figure, it moved. Jerky, unnatural movements. Its limbs were impossibly long, bending at sharp angles. Its head tilted in ways a human neck couldn't. Its skin was pale, almost reflective in the dim light. And its eyes, black voids that seemed to absorb the light. Daniel froze. The figure tilted its head and made a sound. Not a growl, not a scream, but a low, vibrating hiss that seemed to enter his skull. The tapping grew louder, echoing through the maze of containers. He tried to back away, but the rows seemed to stretch endlessly, the exit always out of reach. Every aisle led him back to the same spot, as if the warehouse itself was alive, rearranging around him. By 3 a.m., panic had set in. Daniel ran blindly, slipping over crates, banging into metal shelving. He could hear whispering now, low and layered, calling his name. Daniel. Daniel. It came from everywhere at once, impossible to pinpoint. His flashlight flickered, leaving him in near total darkness, shadows stretching and twisting. Something brushed against his arm, a cold, elongated hand, and he spun around, flashlight stabbing into the darkness. Nothing. Hours seemed to pass, though he had no sense of time. By 4:15 a.m., Daniel had barricaded himself inside the small office at the far end of the warehouse. The windows showed darkness, unbroken, but he could hear the scraping, the tapping, the whispers just beyond the walls. The monitors in the office, normally showing security footage, displayed static. Amid the static, he glimpsed the figure again, closer, crouched at impossible angles, watching. Daniel knew he had to escape. He braced himself and ran toward the exit, but the doors resisted. It was as though the warehouse itself didn't want him to leave. Behind him, the tapping accelerated, accompanied by the sound of dragging feet. He could hear the whispers repeating his name, over and over, faster, urgent. Finally, with a desperate push, he yanked a door open and ran into the lot. Outside, the fog clung to the ground, cold and heavy. The building loomed behind him, seemingly ordinary in the morning light. Nothing to suggest the terror within. Daniel didn't stop running until he reached his car several blocks away. By the time he looked back, the warehouse looked normal, too normal. He reported the night to security and management. They found nothing. No evidence of any figure, no broken locks, no signs of entry. The cameras had glitches during the night, but nothing that explained Daniel's account. Some staff dismissed it as exhaustion or hallucination. Daniel knew it was not. Weeks passed. Other night workers began reporting strange occurrences. Forklifts starting on their own, shadows in peripheral vision, whispers, tapping, and feeling of being followed. Some quit, others refused night shifts entirely. But Daniel had seen it. He knew the figure existed, and he feared that it wasn't confined to the warehouse. At home, Daniel noticed shadows moving in ways that shouldn't be possible, even in daylight. Doors creaked open by themselves. He began to hear the tapping at night, soft at first, then insistent, persistent. Whispers followed him wherever he went, low and layered, chanting his name. He installed cameras, but review showed nothing, only fleeting static or shadows too fast to identify. Months later, Daniel dared to return to the warehouse to confront it, hoping it was all in his mind. As he walked through the container area, the shadows shifted, elongating unnaturally. The tapping began almost immediately, echoing through the high metal shelves. A figure emerged from the darkness, crouched atop a container, limbs bending at impossible angles, head tilted inhumanly. Its black void eyes locked on him. Daniel ran, desperately trying to reach the exit. Corridors stretched, aisles twisted. The tapping and whispers were everywhere. Behind him, the figure moved in bursts, jerky, impossible, relentless. When he finally burst into the lot, gasping and shaking, he realized that the warehouse wasn't confined by hours or walls. It existed beyond the physical. Daniel quit that night. He never returned. But the tapping followed him. Even now, he notices it in quiet moments, on stairs, behind doors, in empty hallways. Sometimes, when the lights flicker, he sees a shadow too long, too wrong, and hears the whispers calling his name. The warehouse was only the beginning. The figure had claimed him, and no matter where he went, it was still there, patient, waiting, unyielding, eternal. He survived. Barely. But he would never be free. Story the end. It was the fall of 2017 when I started working at a 24-hour gas station just outside of Louisville, Kentucky. It was one of those old roadside stations surrounded by fields and forest, miles from the nearest town. The kind of place truckers stopped to rest and locals avoided after dark. The pay was bad, but I needed the money. And honestly, I didn't mind working nights. I liked the quiet. But that job changed how I thought about nighttime forever. The first few shifts were boring in the usual way. I'd mop floors, stock shelves, stare at the clock, Every couple of hours, a semi would pull up and a tired driver would stumble in for coffee or cigarettes. Sometimes I'd get that weird sense that someone was outside watching, but when I checked, there'd be nothing except the wind moving through the trees and the hum of the fluorescent lights. My coworker on the day shift, Lisa, was in her 40s and had worked there for over 10 years. On my second week, she warned me about the 3 a.m. weirdness. I laughed it off, but she didn't smile. "You'll see," she said. "When it gets real quiet, too quiet, you'll know." It was around that time I noticed something strange with the security cameras. We had 6, 4 covering the inside and 2 outside, one for the pumps and one for the side lot. Around 3 a.m. one night, while I was checking the monitors, I saw movement on the outside camera facing the lot. A person, tall and thin, walking toward the store from the trees. At first, I thought it was a customer, but as they came closer, I noticed how they moved, jerky, off rhythm, like their body didn't know how to walk correctly. I stood up, staring at the screen. The figure was pale, wearing something dark. Then, as it reached the edge of the light from the pumps, the feed glitched. Static, a blur, and the figure was gone. I went to the door, peered out, but there was nothing. The only thing I saw was an empty lot and trees swaying in the wind. The next morning, I asked Lisa about it. She looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "Don't ever open that door if you see someone outside after 3. Not for anyone." I thought she was joking, but the look in her eyes told me she wasn't. The following night was slow. Around 2:45, a storm rolled in. Rain beat against the glass, thunder rolling through the dark. I was watching the cameras again, half asleep, when I noticed something on the screen. Someone standing at pump 3. A man, maybe 6 feet tall, wearing a soaked hoodie. He wasn't moving, just standing. I called out through the intercom, "Sir, you okay out there?" No response. He didn't even flinch. Just stood there, head tilted slightly, staring toward the store. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the man didn't even seem wet. His hoodie looked dry. I blinked, and for a second, the feed glitched again, static, and when it cleared, he was gone. I checked the window. No one was there. My heart was pounding, and I told myself it had to be the storm messing with the feed. But just as I started to relax, I heard it. 3 sharp knocks on the glass front door. I froze. Slowly, I turned toward it. There was no one there. The knocks came again. 3, slow, deliberate. The sound vibrated through the empty station. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped closer, but the door was completely clear. No figure, no shadow, no reflection. And then, bang! This time it was loud, like something hit the glass with force. I stumbled back. Then the lights flickered, and the power went out. For a few seconds, the only sound was the rain and my own breathing. The emergency lights kicked in, bathing everything in a dim red glow. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but before I could dial, I noticed movement on the far end of the store, by the snack aisle. Someone was standing there, tall, completely still, their head tilted in that same unnatural way. I raised my flashlight. The beam shook in my trembling hand. The figure was pale, skin almost gray, clothes soaked even though the floor around them was dry. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words caught in my throat. Then it smiled. It wasn't a normal smile. It stretched too far, splitting its face in a way that made my stomach twist. Its eyes were wide, black as oil, and it whispered something, just one word, "inside." The flashlight flickered. When it came back on, it was gone. The power returned about 5 minutes later. The lights came on, the machines beeped, the rain outside started to ease up. But when I checked the cameras again, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The outside camera showed wet footprints, bare feet, leading from the front door into the station. They stopped right in front of the counter where I was standing. I quit an hour before sunrise. The manager begged me to stay, said weird things happen sometimes, but that they were just electrical issues. I didn't care. I left, drove home shaking, and swore I'd never work nights again. But after a week, I started getting calls at 3 a.m. No one on the other end, just faint static. Then breathing. Slow, wet breathing. I changed my number. It didn't stop. One night, I woke up to that same knocking, 3 knocks on my apartment door. My stomach dropped. I froze in bed, heart hammering. The sound came again. I grabbed a kitchen knife and crept to the door. I looked through the peephole. No one. No one there. Then I realized something. The knocking wasn't coming from the hallway side. It was coming from inside the apartment. I turned around. Standing in the living room, just barely visible in the darkness, was the same figure. Tall, gray, head tilted. It smiled again. I remember dropping the knife. I remember the whisper, closer now, right by my ear. "You let me in." The next thing I knew, it was morning. I was lying on the floor, cold, my front door wide open. Everything looked normal, but the carpet was damp, like someone had walked through the rain. I moved the next day. Lisa called me a few weeks later. She said the cameras at the station started acting weird again. The night guy who replaced me went missing. They found his car still running by the pumps, door open, lights on, but no sign of him. All they saw on the footage was him standing at the front door, staring out into the dark and then walking backwards slowly until he was out of frame. I told her to quit. She said she couldn't. She needed the money. That was 3 years ago. The gas station burned down the following spring. They said it was an electrical fire, but there was something strange in the report. No one could find where the fire started. It was as if the flames had come from the inside out. Sometimes, late at night, I still dream of that red emergency light and the sound of those 3 knocks. When I wake up, I swear I can still smell rain and gasoline and hear a voice whispering from somewhere behind me, soft, patient, hungry. Inside. Story the end. It was another quiet night at the small-town gas station where I worked the graveyard shift. I had been covering nights for over a year, and most nights were uneventful. A few drunks, the occasional trucker, or someone picking up last-minute snacks. I liked the solitude at first. It felt peaceful, meditative even. But that night, something changed. I arrived at 10 p.m. and did my usual routine. Counted the register, restocked shelves, wiped down counters. Outside, a storm had rolled in. The wind was gusting, rain slamming against the windows in relentless sheets. The highway nearby was mostly empty, the kind of desolation that makes you feel like the world has disappeared. At first, I found comfort in the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights and the low buzz of the neon open sign. Around 11, I noticed something odd. A man in a dark hoodie appeared in the parking lot, standing completely still, staring at the store. I thought he might be a late-night customer, but the storm was brutal, and no one should have been outside. I squinted through the rain-soaked glass, but when I reached for the door, he was gone. I shook my head, telling myself the wind and rain had distorted my vision. By midnight, the unease had grown. The air in the store felt heavier, almost damp, though the storm outside already made it humid. The fluorescent lights flickered occasionally, and shadows in the corners seemed to move independently of the light. I kept my radio on, static-filled but comforting in its predictability, and continued with the night's work. At 1:30 a.m., the first unmistakable sign that something wasn't right happened. The door chimed, but when I looked up, no one was there. I checked the security cameras, empty lot. I told myself it was the wind or maybe an animal, but then it happened again, louder this time. I froze, listening to the storm outside, the hum of the lights and the empty silence of the store. Something was in there with me. Around 2 a.m., I was stocking drinks in the cooler when I felt it. A presence behind me. I froze, heart hammering, convinced someone had entered the store. Slowly I turned, but the aisle was empty. Just my reflection in the glass door of the cooler. My stomach tightened. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow moving across the back wall. But when I looked directly, it was gone. Then I started hearing whispers, soft, indistinct at first, like someone muttering under their breath. I thought it was the storm, the sound of rain against the roof, until I realized the whispers were coming from inside the store, around me, echoing off the walls. I tried calling the police or my manager, but the phone lines were dead. Static filled the radio when I tried to contact anyone. At 3 a.m., the situation escalated. The cash register began ringing on its own. Coins clattered to the floor. The receipt printer spit out paper with nothing on it. I stumbled backward, trying to make sense of it, and then I saw it. A tall, dark figure standing near the front door. Faceless, featureless, its head tilted slightly as if observing me. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I was frozen in pure terror. I ran to the back room, thinking I could hide, but as I entered, the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the cold, and the whispers grew louder, now overlapping in unintelligible words. Something was circling me, patient, deliberate. I could feel it moving closer, even though I couldn't see it. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning. I crouched behind a stack of boxes, shivering uncontrollably. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward me, every flicker of light revealing shapes that disappeared when I focused on them. Then I heard footsteps on the linoleum floor, slow, deliberate pacing. They stopped near the back room, and the whispers became clear. You shouldn't be here. Leave now. By 4:30 a.m., I finally mustered the courage to open the back door. Outside, the storm had calmed slightly, but the parking lot was empty. I ran to my car, soaked, shivering, heart racing. I dared not look back, but I could feel it watching me, patient and waiting. When I finally reached home, I locked every door, turned on every light, and tried to sleep. I didn't. In the following weeks, I heard from other night shift workers at gas stations and convenience stores in the area. They reported the same things. Doors chiming with no one there, shadows that moved independently, whispers that came from empty aisles, figures standing in the parking lot, faceless, silent. Some quit, some stayed. I never returned to night shifts. I work days now, but I know it still exists. Even now, years later, I drive past gas stations at night and feel the hair on my arms rise. I glance at the windows, half expecting to see a tall, dark figure standing silently observing. I know it waits, it is patient, and anyone who works nights knows the truth. In the quiet hours when the world is asleep, we are never truly alone. Story the end. It was 2019 when I took a night security job at a mid-sized warehouse just outside of Dayton, Ohio. The building used to belong to a furniture company, but had recently been leased to a logistics firm. My job was simple: make rounds every 2 hours, monitor the cameras, and keep a log of any unusual activity. I didn't mind night work. It was quiet, paid decently, and I could listen to music most of the time. But that warehouse ended up being the reason I can't stay alone in any dark building ever again. The warehouse was huge, 3 floors tall, full of echoing metal shelves and dim corridors that all looked the same. Even with all the lights on, shadows gathered in corners like they were alive. There were always odd noises too, clicks, groans, distant thuds that no one could ever trace. The manager said it was just the building settling. My first few shifts were uneventful. The only other person on site at night was an older janitor named Carl. He was polite but quiet, the kind of guy who'd been doing the same job for decades. On my 3rd night, he told me something that stuck with me. "You ever hear voices around here?" he asked, his mop dripping water onto the concrete floor. I laughed. "Voices? You mean the creaks and stuff?" He shook his head. "No, I mean people. Calling your name, whispering. It starts about 3 a.m. You'll know it when it happens. Just don't answer." I smiled and nodded, thinking he was messing with me. But that night, around 3:10 a.m., while checking the north wing, I heard it. Faint, soft, like someone whispering my name from behind one of the tall shelving units. "Evan." I froze. The sound was so distinct I thought Carl was trying to mess with me. I called out, "Very funny, Carl." No answer. The whisper came again, a little louder this time. "Evan." My stomach tightened. I swept my flashlight around the shelves, but there was no one there. I stood completely still for a moment, then started backing away. The whisper followed me, closer now like it was moving with me. But the sound came from multiple directions at once, bouncing off the walls. I turned and hurried back toward the security office, not stopping until I locked the door behind me. Carl came in 10 minutes later. I told him what happened. He didn't look surprised. "Told you," he said. "They don't like being ignored." "They?" I asked. He just shook his head and went back to mopping. After that night, things started getting stranger. Doors that I knew I had locked would be wide open. Items on the shelves shifted positions between rounds. The motion sensors near the loading docks would go off even when the cameras showed nothing. I started documenting everything, thinking maybe I could prove it was a system glitch or prank. Then one night, I noticed something on the security feed. In the camera for the basement storage area, a place we never used anymore, I saw a flicker of movement. A figure walking slowly between the shelves. I called Carl on the radio. "Hey, are you downstairs?" "No," he said. "Why?" "There's someone in the basement." He was silent for a long time before saying, "You sure?" Yeah, I can see them right now. Don't go down there. His voice had changed. Flat, serious, terrified. Why not? I asked, because once you go down there, it knows your face. Before I could ask what he meant, the radio cut out. Just static. I stared at the monitor again. The figure had stopped moving. It was standing directly in front of the camera now, looking up. The image glitched. For half a second, I saw its face. Pale skin, hollow eyes, mouth stretched wide open in a scream, but no sound came through. Then the feed went black. I didn't move for several minutes. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely type a message to my manager. I told myself it was a glitch, maybe a reflection, maybe a trick of the camera, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I'd seen was aware of me. At 3:33 a.m., every light in the warehouse went out. Total darkness. The backup generators didn't kick in. My flashlight beam barely cut through the black. The air felt thicker, heavier. I grabbed my radio again. Carl, you there? No response. Then, from somewhere far down the hallway, I heard it again. Evan. That voice. Soft, drawn out, but wrong, like it was trying to sound human and failing. I turned toward the sound and my flashlight flickered. For a second, I saw something at the far end of the hall. Tall, thin, with its head tilted at an angle that didn't look possible. I blinked and it was gone. The whisper came again, this time right beside my ear. I ran. I sprinted through the halls, past rows of shelves that I knocking over boxes as I went. The building groaned, like something alive was moving through the walls. I could hear footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, echoing off the concrete. I didn't dare look back. I made it to the office, slammed the door, and turned the lock. The power came back a moment later, and everything looked normal. Too normal. Carl never answered the radio again. When the morning supervisor arrived, I told him everything. He checked the basement, but it was empty. Cameras were down from electrical interference. They found Carl's mop in the middle of the floor, water still dripping from it, but he was gone. His car was in the lot, his lunch still in the fridge. He never came back. A week later, the company brought in another night guard. I tried warning him, but he laughed it off, said he'd worked worse places. 2 nights later, he quit. Didn't give a reason. Just dropped off his badge and left. A few weeks after that, the company shut the warehouse down completely. I moved to another city, found a day job, and tried to forget. But sometimes when I'm walking home late at night, I still hear it, soft from somewhere behind me. Evan. The first few times, I turned around. No one was there. Now I just keep walking, because every time I look, I feel it getting closer. The worst part? A few days ago, a box showed up on my porch. No return address. Inside was an old warehouse ID badge. Carl's, there, and taped to the back was a note written in shaky handwriting. It knows your face now, too. Story the end. It was just after midnight when Erin clocked in for her overnight shift at the Maplewood Nursing and Rehabilitation Center, a quiet, dimly lit facility tucked along a back road in rural Indiana. The night shift was always eerie there. Long corridors that seemed to stretch forever, flickering lights, and the occasional distant sound of a patient talking in their sleep. Erin had worked the shift for nearly 2 years. She was used to the silence, the loneliness, and the subtle creepiness of the place. But what happened that night wasn't the usual strangeness. It was something else. Something she couldn't explain, something she still hears every time she closes her eyes. The night started normally enough. Erin checked her rounds list and walked through the first floor, peeking in on the patients. Most were asleep. Only 1 or 2 stirred, mumbling incoherently. By 12:45 a.m., she was sitting at the nurse's station, sipping coffee and reading over chart notes when she heard it, the faint sound of footsteps coming from the East Wing. That was strange. The East Wing had been closed for almost 6 months for renovations. No patients were supposed to be there. Erin stood, listening. The steps were slow and deliberate, like someone dragging their feet down the linoleum hallway. She radioed the security guard, Tom, who usually made rounds every hour. "Hey, Tom, are you in the East Wing?" she asked. "No," his voice crackled back through the radio. "I'm outside near the maintenance entrance." "Why?" She hesitated. "I think someone's in there. I can hear footsteps." Tom sighed. "Probably pipes again. You know how this place echoes, but I'll come check it out." While she waited, Erin walked down the main hall, flashlight in hand. The building was old, its ceiling lights buzzing faintly. As she neared the east wing's double doors, she realized something was off. The air on that side was colder, and the faint sound of shuffling continued. She reached for the handle and froze. Through the small window in the door, she saw movement, a shadow crossing the hall inside. Her breath caught. The east wing was supposed to be locked. She pulled the handle. It was stiff, but not locked. The door creaked open. The hallway beyond was pitch black, lights dead, floor tiles cracked. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something else, something metallic, like old blood. She called out softly, "Hello? Anyone in here?" No response. Just the echo of her own voice, swallowed by the dark. Tom arrived a minute later, flashlight in hand. "You sure you saw something?" he asked. "I did," she whispered. "Something moved down there." They began walking slowly down the corridor, flashlights slicing through the black. Dust hung in the air, glinting like tiny motes in the beams of light. Room after room stood empty, doors hanging open, furniture covered in sheets. Halfway down the hall, Tom froze. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Erin strained her ears. There it was, a soft tapping, like fingernails against glass, coming from one of the rooms at the end of the hall. They moved closer, the tapping growing louder, faster. When they reached the last room, Tom pushed the door open. It was empty except for an old hospital bed and a single wheelchair in the corner. The tapping had stopped. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered once and died completely, plunging them into darkness. Erin's flashlight sputtered and went out. She heard Tom curse, fumbling with his radio. Then, from somewhere inside the room, came a whisper. It was faint but unmistakable, a woman's voice, trembling and hoarse. "Help me." Erin felt her blood run cold. She turned her flashlight back on, it flickered weakly, and aimed it toward the sound. The wheelchair had moved. It was now facing them. Tom took a step forward. "Who's there?" No answer. Just the slow creak of the wheelchair rocking back and forth on its own. "Let's go," Erin said, voice shaking. But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. Tom lunged for the handle, pulling, but it wouldn't budge. Then the whisper came again, closer this time. "Help me. He won't let me go." The temperature plummeted. Erin could see her breath clouding in front of her. The flashlight beam quivered as her hand shook. In the corner, something began to move, a dark shape rising slowly from behind the bed. It was tall, impossibly thin, its head bent at an unnatural angle. The light flickered, and for an instant she saw its face. Hollow eyes, a gaping mouth twisted into a silent scream. Tom slammed his shoulder into the door again, and this time it gave way. They stumbled into the hallway, slamming it shut behind them. Erin gasped for air, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear Tom calling for backup on his radio. When maintenance arrived, 15 minutes later, the east wing was inspected from end to end. They found nothing. No sign of anyone, no footprints, nothing disturbed. The old wheelchair in the room? Gone. Tom refused to talk about it afterward. He quit 2 days later, citing personal reasons. Erin tried to keep working, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Over the next few nights, things escalated. She started hearing the tapping again, always coming from behind closed doors. Patients began reporting strange occurrences. Cold drafts, whispers, seeing a tall man in the halls at night. One elderly woman refused to sleep, insisting the shadow man was standing in her room, staring. By the third week, Erin was barely sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that twisted figure in her mind. The hollow eyes, the mouth that looked ready to scream, but never did. One night, as she charted near the nurse's station, she felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned, expecting another nurse, but the hall was empty. That same night, a patient went missing. An 82-year-old man named Harold, confined to a wheelchair, vanished from his room sometime between 2 and 2:30 a.m. The security cameras in his hallway glitched out during that exact window, showing only static. When the footage resumed, the hallway was empty, but the faint sound of tapping could be heard on the audio track. The next morning, staff found Harold's wheelchair in the east wing, inside the same room Erin and Tom had entered that first night. The bed had been stripped bare, the words, "Help me," scrawled in the dust on the wall. After that, Erin refused to work nights. She transferred to day shift, but it didn't help. The nightmares followed her home. Dreams of long, cold hallways, wheelchairs moving on their own, and the whispering voice pleading for help. Sometimes, even during the day, she'd catch movement out of the corner of her eye, shadows bending where they shouldn't. And sometimes, late at night, when she couldn't sleep, she'd hear it again, the soft, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere in her apartment. She tried to tell herself it was her imagination, stress, leftover trauma from what she'd seen. But one night she heard her name whispered in the darkness, soft, trembling, familiar. Erin. She froze. The sound came from the hallway outside her bedroom. She forced herself to look. The apartment was dark, but the faint glow from the streetlight illuminated something at the end of the hall, a wheelchair. Empty. Still. Facing her. Her heart pounded as she stumbled backward, grabbing her phone. She blinked, and the wheelchair was gone. But the tapping had started again, coming from somewhere behind her walls, slow, deliberate, endless. The next morning, she packed a bag and left town without telling anyone. She never went back to Maplewood. No one knows where she went. Months later, another night nurse reported hearing whispers in the East Wing. The words were faint but unmistakable. "Help me." "He won't let me go." And from somewhere deep within the dark came the tapping. Story the end.